The EP Podcast. Heard everywhere podcasts can be found, and always at theeppodcast.com.
I feel like the weekend came up quick. Welcome into the EP Podcast. My name is Chris Lanuti. Special half-hour weekend episode as we like to do on the weekends. One guest sitting down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar having a conversation. We're going to talk about what you can eat, what you can't eat, get some real medical advice from my own doctor, Dr. David Beckmann of Family First Medical Group. Let's see if I can find a way to lose weight without putting a lot of effort into it. That's the goal today. It's all brought to you by the First National Bank of Evergreen Park, dedicated to supporting our area with great banking tools and friendly service. They are a true community bank that provides our neighborhood with customized financial solutions like total access checking, an account with free ATMs nationwide. Plus, when you open a total access checking account today, you get a $300 bonus. Open online at bankevergreenpark.com/total access/EP. $100 required to open. Requirements to qualify. Must use link to apply. Member FDIC. The last episode we released had a trivia contest with our next guest. We also had one of the guys behind Evergreen Park becoming Tree City, USA, and so much more in that 30 minutes of good. If you missed it, go back. You can listen anytime. It's on demand. Anywhere podcasts can be found, and always at theeppodcast.com. Joining me down here at the 9-foot homemade oak bar, it's been several years since we have not done this on the phone. Dr. David Beckmann, a good friend of the show who's been on the show an awful lot over the last couple of years, talking about a myriad of things. And I want to sit down today with you, Doc, and talk about how fat I am, if you don't mind.
It's up to you. If that's what you want to talk about, we can talk about that.
I do. I want to talk about how. Okay, so here's the thing. First off, he's from Family First Medical Group, yourffmg.com. They're located over on Western Avenue in that building. You got a beautiful building. I was just over there. You got a beautiful office up on the 7th floor of that professional building. I want to say it's what would it be? That'd be 98th and Western, somewhere in there. Yeah. First of all, tell everybody a little bit about what you do there, because it's not just a family practice, right?
Right. So we have a women's healthcare group that we're partnered with. So we see we basically see patients of all ages: infants, newborns, kids, adults, pregnant women. So basically, anyone can see us there.
You can see the skyline from the windows.
You can see the skyline.
I thought that was the most interesting thing, is that you have the windows tinted and slightly angled so that while you're in there, nobody can see in the window, but the patient can look out at this. You can see the skyline of Chicago, or some of the windows look out over Evergreen and you can see everything there. I was just there last week with Mayor Kelly Burke and the members of the Chamber of Commerce with you guys, and you were doing a tour. And I told her, I'm like, this is where the command post is if the zombie outbreak occurs in Evergreen Park, because you can see everything from there.
You can see everything.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Okay, so when you're looking down from the window and you see all the fat people, because I think everybody's gotten bigger over the last couple of years. I think there's probably stats on that, right? Have people gotten bigger over the last couple of years?
Definitely. You've seen it in adults, but I think more worrisome is in kids, where the number of obese kids have increased significantly. I think there was a 30 to 40% increase in the number of kids that now qualify as being obese. So it's definitely been a huge issue.
I think one of the issues that I've noticed is sports. When my kids didn't have anything to do, all of a sudden that athleticism went away. Yeah. My daughter was an everyday softball player, okay? And then all of a sudden they couldn't do some of the teams that she would have been on, Sure. And so all of a sudden she didn't play sports. And we would sit there and say, okay, well, we got to find something for you to do. You can't sit in your room. And she's very artistic, and she she paints and she sculpts and she does all kinds of really cool artistic things. But she just fell back on that. And I was like, you're literally in your room all day. You have to get out and pump those legs and move a little bit.
Definitely. Yeah. I think the lack of sports, and also just the lack of social engagement with kids too. They're sitting on their computer all day in school, and then they don't have anywhere to go, whether it be sports activities or even just hanging out at a park. In the beginning of the pandemic, you saw the tapes around playgrounds and lakeshore that was closed, and things that we look back on and we think that was pretty silly that we did that, but but all of that contributed.
Yeah,
yes.
I can imagine. And then for me, here's the thing, because the reason I wanted to have you on and talk today is I think that there's a lot of people that are looking around over the last couple of years and looking at their habits and are going, okay, hold on a second. I'm a little unhealthy. Like, I know some people that got really healthy. Okay. I've had people that I've talked to who 2 years ago looked different because they said, well, the best defense against this whole thing that's going on is for me to really get healthy.
Yeah.
And I felt the same way, but it's very hard to do that. And it is really hard. I commend those people who are that disciplined that got so healthy. Me, my alcohol intake increased significantly. Okay. Especially in the early days of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. And then just the way that I was eating. So what I've been doing now is I've kind of been looking at myself and I'm like, I'm going to turn 45 here in May. And I feel like this is like an important time for me to try to get like some of the things that are a little out of whack taken care of. Because I would like to make it a lot longer in life. And I feel like if I continue the way I'm going right now, I'm definitely shortening it up. Okay. Yeah. And I'll talk a little bit about it because I know you're not going to talk about me unless I tell you it's okay because
That's
you're
right.
my doctor. Okay. So I have no problem talking about it. I went in, I want to say, to your office about 4 months ago or so, did a full checkup with you, and most everything was okay. I was like borderline on my cholesterol level, but you were like, a lot of this is good cholesterol, and you weren't like, you didn't want to put me on any medication. You're like, everything looks okay. I am overweight. I mean, I'm 5'10". I'm sitting at 230 right now on average. And at times in my life, I would say my average is normally 200. And I have had times where I've lost a lot of weight and sat at about 180 in my adult life. Okay. I don't think I'll ever get to 180 again, but I feel like I'd like to get that down. I have to find a way to get healthy. And one of the things that concerns me the most is my blood pressure was up. For the first time, I think, in my entire life. I've never had blood pressure problems. I was a 911 dispatcher. And when I would go in for a stress test, they would have me run on a treadmill. I mean, as recently as maybe 5 years ago, I'd run on a treadmill. They would ask me about my worst 911 calls to try to get me upset. Okay. And my blood pressure would barely move. Okay. I sat down with a doctor 5-6 years ago and he's like, unless you get hit by a train, you're going to live to be 100 because everything is perfect. Then I went and saw you and I was completely out of whack. So something changed in the last couple of years and we've got to work on that now. Definitely. So when that happens, what's the first thing that you tell somebody that they have to go and do when they're like, wait a minute, hold on a second, blood pressure's a little high, weight's a little high. What do you tell them? You
have to get a baseline. So I can tell patients, and I do tell patients most of the day, you need to exercise and lose weight and eat better. But I mean, I think most people know that. They just know that inherently. So I think the big question is, what do you usually do in terms of activity on a regular basis? And what do you eat? And when do you eat it? And how much do you drink? Because alcohol is a big contributor. Do you smoke? So just kind of figuring out where that baseline is. Because if I tell a patient, watch the amount of carbohydrates that you're eating, the amount of carbs that you're eating, and you're already, you're consuming maybe 50 grams a day, then that's not that beneficial. Whereas if we know that you're consuming 300 or 400 grams of carbohydrates, then we can say, okay, all right, take that. Let's see if we can cut that in half. If you cut that in half, you'll definitely lose weight. Or we say, okay, how much physical activity do you do in a week? The recommendation is that you do 150 minutes of moderate exercise a week. So that can be concentrated.
So I can do 30 minutes a day on a treadmill and I would make that.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, 30 minutes on a treadmill. You could even do it in 10-minute increments. So it doesn't have to be all at the same time. Some people, they'll wake up in the morning, they'll spend 5 minutes doing body weight exercises, and then later on in the day, they'll add another 20 minutes on. So it doesn't have to be going to a gym, running at the same pace on a treadmill. And I think that's one of the things that has shifted a little bit over the last few years, which is the days of going to the gym and staying at the same pace on a treadmill or on an exercise bike for an hour or an hour and a half. You're not really getting that much benefit. You're spending a huge amount of time doing that, and you're not burning as many calories as you want, and you're not using different types of muscles as much as you want either. So
that's something I think that's interesting to me, because I've done that before in my life, where I go to a gym and I'm in the gym and I'm like, okay, well, we're going to exercise for an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I think that's the reason why you stop going.
Yeah.
Because it becomes like, geez, 2 hours out of my day, especially when you think the driving there, the driving back, the changing, I got to hit the showers afterwards, all this other stuff like that. I mean, yeah, sure. I think you need to do it when you want to build like a ton of muscle, or you want to get like crazy fit or something, or you're an athlete. But just for like simple weight loss and things like that you're saying that's not something you necessarily have to do. You could just change a few eating habits and just add a little exercise in.
That's right. Yeah, I think doing high intensity interval training, that's kind of the trend these days, where you're doing body weight exercises, you're getting your heart rate up for maybe a minute and a half. You have a 30-second, 60-second interval between, and then you do another set. A lot of times you can get a great workout in 15 minutes with just a few light dumbbells at home, doing some squats, push-ups, jumping jacks, burpees, things like that. You do that, and you actually wind up burning more calories later on throughout the day, usually 2 to 3 times as many calories.
Better to do it in the morning, because then it keeps going all day long.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
are there's all kinds of exercise fads, and I'm going to get into the diet ones with you a little bit, okay? Because I am an expert when it comes to the diet fads, because I've tried a lot of them.
Okay.
Some of them have worked, and some of them have not, okay? And some of them are too hard to maintain these days. But when it comes to the exercise ones, like I have one buddy, he does this P90X, which is like that high impact training stuff. Okay, I know people who just jump on a treadmill and walk for an hour. They put it up at a brisk pace, and at least that way they're not slowing down. They're not stopping every time the dog needs to stop or anything like that. They're keeping a regular pace. Are there exercise, systems, fads, I don't know what you would call them, that you like more than others? Are there ones that stick out to you that you're like, this is stupid and it's unnecessary? Like, what are your thoughts on them?
Yeah. So I think there's a really good app that's called atthe, the number 8fit, and they basically have videos of trainers doing specific exercises, and you input a little bit of your information, like how active you are, how much time you have, and then they develop an exercise program for you, where the longest exercise program is maybe 50 minutes, but most of them are 15 to 20 minutes. And they involve doing things like dips and planks and sit-ups and push-ups and jumping jacks and burpees. These are all activities that you can do with no equipment. You just need a small space in your house. And I think especially when all the gyms closed, this was something that a lot of people started doing. They started kind of stockpiling some equipment for their home gym and clearing out a space so that they could do exercise at home. So I think doing those types of exercises are good. And the one thing I would say is that weightlifting, and I'm not talking about really heavy weightlifting, but 10 to 25, 30 pounds, weightlifting is really important, because especially as you get past 40, 50, you start to lose muscle mass. And when you start to lose muscle mass, you become weaker, your joints become more unstable, you become more prone to injury, you become more prone to arthritis. So doing weight training, both for men and women, I think is really important. And I think actually shifting more of your exercise to doing some weights as opposed to doing tons of cardio is actually better. If you have 4 days where you can work out, if you pick 3 of those days where you do some weights and 1 where you do cardio, it may actually wind up being better for you. And the reason for that is, as you build muscle mass, your metabolism increases, and that increases your ability to burn fat. So
weights actually burn things quickly, because I always think to myself, okay, well, look, I'm not trying to get swole. Like, I'm not, I don't need it. Like I have sneaky strength. Okay. I've done things where, you could throw up weights over your head, and I still have really good upper body strength. I have two things that I've never had to worry about: upper body strength, and my calves sit right below my knees. That's just genetics right there. I see people do like leg exercises, make their legs look a certain way. Mine just look that way. That's the Italian in me. I think that's what it is. When I went to Italy, they all looked like that. Okay. When they were walking around in their swim trunks. So I've always said to myself, okay, I got to lose weight. So I gotta bike. I've got to walk. I've got to do cardio type exercises, because that burns things, where weightlifting makes me think all I'm doing is trying to get like bigger muscles. But you're saying weightlifting actually increases metabolism and makes you lose weight.
Yeah. Weightlifting is really important. And then the other thing just about cardio is there's a difference between dynamic cardio and then traditional cardio. Like traditional cardio is treadmill or bike kind of at the same pace. Dynamic cardio can involve weights, where, for example, you're doing a curl. You're doing a curl, a overhead press, and a squat all in one. That's a very complex movement, but you're using and engaging a lot of different muscles at that same time. Whereas if you're on a bike and you're just kind of pedaling at the same pace, you're definitely getting your heart rate up, you're working your legs. But unless you're doing things where you're sprinting or you're doing hills, you're really not testing different muscles there. So I think that's kind of what you have in the back of your mind is, am I actually using various parts of my body to do these exercises, or is it just focused on one, and obviously more muscles that are engaged better?
Interesting. Okay, so let's talk about food. Okay. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background. We've talked a little bit about it, but I'm going to give you a little bit of background with me and food. First of all, I think this whole thing, I've been seeing these commercials. I don't know if is it Noom or something like that, where they learn like why they are a certain way. Yeah. I always laugh at the Clean Play Club thing, because that's what we had to be. We had to be in the Clean Play Club, and I'm like, well, this is why I eat everything. And I know my dad used to sit at the table all the time, and his thing was like, we paid for this. So if the kids aren't going to finish it, I'm going to grab it off their plate. Yeah. And so I think I've almost become that. Like now I go to restaurants, especially with my little guy, I don't even order him anything. I'm like, you can eat off my plate, because otherwise I'm going to eat off his. And that's, like that's something I was kind of learning that I'm doing, because in my mind, I'm like, whoa, we paid for this. Somebody's got to put this in their belly. Okay. And then it becomes me.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. But when it comes to weight loss, the thing that worked the greatest for me, and I've heard some people say that's insane or that you can hurt yourself. I had one doctor, my doctor at the time, it was before we had met. He was surprised I was doing it, and he thought that I was going to have all kinds of problems. He was very against the Atkins diet. Okay. He's like, oh, that's a lot of fat, and it's a lot of cholesterol, but I followed it religiously. And I think that's the thing. If you follow it religiously and you're not having any carbs, wow, does the weight come off.
Oh, yeah.
Now, you got to get used to the idea that you're going to have a funny taste in your mouth. And at some point, as much as you like bacon, you're going to get sick of eating it. Okay? I mean, there's just certain, but you eat just so much protein. You don't worry about the fat. The fat goes out. At the time that I started, there's a picture of me over here. People can't see it, but I'm up here. You can look at it later. I'm at 260. It's the greatest weight I was ever at in my entire life. It's 2005. That picture up there, I'm at the White Sox World Series. I look like a whale. Okay, I'm so big, all right? We had just had my daughter, and while my wife was eating for two, I decided to eat along with her, okay? And I just got big. I went from 260 to 178, I think was my lowest thing, within 8 months. Like, it just poured off of me when I did the Atkins thing. My doctor said it lowered my blood pressure a little bit, my cholesterol went down, all these things like evened out, and I got better. Do you think that was because I was down to that weight? Do you think it's because of the fact, like, people worry about those kind of diets? Do those kind of diets make you nervous? Because that's a quick weight loss. But I was actually able to keep it off. When I went back to bread, I think I popped up tonight and I hovered at 190 for like the next 5, 6, 7 years. And then I only put weight on again when I went to midnights at the 911 center. And to get through the night, I'm drinking 3 Red Bulls and I'm eating candy. So, but it worked for a long time. So what are your thoughts on diets like that?
I don't oppose an Atkins diet or paleo or keto. I think people have to find what works for them. I'm a little less worried about cholesterol intake and things like that. Yes, it can impact the cholesterol sometimes, but it's actually the blood pressure and the weight and the insulin resistance that pose a bigger threat to people. So I think that when you lost all those or when your measures all got better, I think it was because of the weight loss. The thing is that when you do an Atkins diet or you do a keto diet or a paleo diet, it's very hard to sustain that long term.
There's a point you give it up.
Yeah.
You're like, okay, I want bread. And you know what it was for me? The next year we went to Italy. And there's absolutely no way.
There's no way.
To stay on Atkins when you're walking around northern Italy. I told myself, when we get to Italy, I'm off this. And I kind of like started to take myself off it about a month earlier, like where I started to introduce things because I knew. But what was interesting was when I added it back in, I gained a little bit. It was that instant like, okay, wait a minute, you're having bread now, you're going to balloon up. But going from 179 to like 185 and eventually stabilizing over the next couple months at around 190, it was worth it to me.
Yeah.
To gain those extra 12 pounds because of all the stuff that I had lost.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the diets that have the most evidence for lowering your risk of cancer, lowering your risk of heart disease, lowering your risk of stroke, those are diets that are whole food, plant-based diets. So it doesn't mean you have to be a vegetarian, but when you're thinking about eating, basically a good rule of thumb is if you're eating a lot of colorful foods that have been, one of my mentors said, have you been eating a lot of colorful foods that have recently been alive? That kind of stuck with me, where you're staying away from a lot of like the packaged stuff, the stuff that is that's white and kind of bland looking. Those are foods that are ultra processed. They usually your body doesn't handle them that well. It increases your insulin level quite a bit, and when you keep getting these spikes in insulin, that actually is what sets you up for developing diabetes down the road. So I think in the back of your mind, thinking about eating more vegetables, more nuts, more seeds, more lean protein, less of the processed stuff, less of the packaged stuff, that's kind of where you want to trend to. And I think with fat definitely plays a role. You should eat some fat. You can't eliminate fat. And I think one of the biggest detriments to a lot of people, maybe even to a generation of people, was the fat-free craze. Because looking for all these fat-free foods wound up dramatically increasing your carbohydrate intake. And that, I think, set a lot of people back.
Yeah, it really kind of changed, I think, habits and stuff like that. So you say like, okay, I eat vegetables. I'm good with that. My wife like insists on always having that kind of stuff. There's a salad at the table every night, or there's a couple of vegetable options. And we've actually a while, we have people that laugh at us. We don't have a microwave. I did this about 6-7 years ago. I was like, the food is terrible when we heat it up. We're just taking shortcuts. And when we actually prepare the food in the oven or on the stovetop, it tastes better.
Oh, yeah.
And I felt like I wasn't getting the nutritional value nuking the cauliflower, right. I was sucking everything out of it while I was doing that. So we don't do that anymore. So we try to keep some fresh fruits and vegetables and things around the house. But I like red meat. I like chicken. I like fish, but I like red meat. I like to smoke. Okay.
Yep.
I have a smoker. I like to grill in the summer. I feel like lately the new thing is telling you like, well, if you grill or if you smoke, you're going to get cancer. And if you eat too much red meat, you're going to die. And that's like the new phase.
Yeah.
Is that silly? Is that wrong? Are they right about this? Because a while back you were supposed to have margarine instead of butter. Then they switched it back. So yes. I don't know if I'm going to jump on that train yet.
Sure. I think you're right. The current trend is definitely limiting the smoked foods, the processed things like sausages and bacon, and limiting the amount of red meat. So I think there's probably some truth to that, especially with colon cancer. Colon cancer, actually, the screening recommendation dropped in the last couple years to 45. It it used to be.
You and I are having an appointment soon. Well, this is gonna change our relationship, I believe.
Exactly. Yeah. So it used to be 50. It's 45 now, and I think so there's a lot more awareness about colon cancer, and there is this association with more red meat consumption, increased risk of colon cancer. So I usually tell patients, if you can limit your red meat consumption to once, maybe twice a week.
Wow.
That's ideal.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you're ruining my day.
I'm sorry about that.
You are. You're just ruining my day right there. Okay. I mean, and when we're talking red meat, are we talking like if I have lunch meat and things like that, like I make a ham sandwich, like you're still seeing it like that?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for ruining everything.
I'm sorry.
Man, oh man. Now I'm worried about my screening coming up. Jeez. Okay. So overall, it sounds to me like exercise-wise, if you're just doing cardio, you're missing the boat because weightlifting is going to get you much better results if you're using weights because you're increasing your metabolism. It's okay to try some of these diets that are going to take weight off as long as you're following them the right way. And of course, consult your doctor or things like that. Okay, red meat is still okay, but there is the possibility that you may be having a little bit too much. Now let's get to the fun part at the end here. Alcohol.
Yeah.
I'm sitting at a bar. You know, I have two things I really like. I like craft beers, and I'm a big bourbon drinker. Now, the bourbon, to me, especially when I'm trying to cut back on my carbs, I'm like, this is free because there's no carbs in this. Okay. Like the alcohol burns off the carbs and I'm not actually having any carbs. In fact, that's what I would do when I was on Atkins. If I couldn't drink beer, so I would drink, a bourbon. I think at the time I was drinking scotch at the time, but I mean, like, that's what I would have. I'd have a drink on the rocks and I would just do that. Okay. I try to hold it back a little bit, but I know that with my show, the Southside Pod goes and reviews breweries. So I'm going to go at least once to twice a week to a brewery and try a couple of beers. Okay. And then I'm trying to cut back. I really have cut back a lot on what I used to have. You also have people that will say there's good things that alcohol does. Like my wife is convinced that drinking red wine at night is like health food. So let's talk a little bit about that here as we get towards the end. Okay. Like, I mean, you've never scolded me for the fact that I drink. Okay. You've never scolded me for it. But I mean, like, where do you fall on it? Like, are there some benefits to the red wine? Are there things that people should look out for when it comes to alcoholic drinks?
Well, this is another thing that fluctuates all the time, where you say no amount of alcohol is safe. And then you say, well, actually, a glass of red wine at night is okay. So the pendulum keeps swinging. The most recent way it's swung right now is you shouldn't drink at all.
Well, boo.
And I'll just say personally, I don't adhere to that either. So
that's what I always think is funny. Like, you know what? You really shouldn't drink anymore. I'm going out later.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's almost like everything. Moderation is the key. And so the question is, what is moderation? Because that's something that a lot of people have different definitions of, because I'll have patients that will come in and they'll say, I drink as much as all my friends. And I say, well, you and your friends are all drinking way too much.
Right.
Because, they'll say, well, we'll have 10, 12 beers 1 or 2 nights out of the week. And that's way too much. The recommendation is, if you're going to drink and you're a man, you should drink less than 14 drinks in a week. And also less than 4 drinks in a sitting. And so a drink is...
I'm not doing that bad then, I think.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing, I during the pandemic, no, I was really bad. Okay, I mean, like, seriously, what am I going to do? I'm sitting down there at a bar. I can't do anything. There's booze everywhere. But no, I think that, like, my general way that I do things is that I will have... If I'm going to have a bourbon, I know what an ounce or 2 ounces of it or whatever it is. So I'll have a couple of fingers with like an ice cube. And at worst, I might go back and have a second one. But then if I'm doing that every day of that week, I'm sticking within my 14 per week. And I'm not having more than 4 drinks per day. So I'm actually sitting somewhere in that.
Yeah.
Now, there are times where I go over. Yesterday, I went to the White Sox game. I went over. I know I went over. Okay. I was having a good time. I wasn't counting them, But I mean, like, I think that generally I've gotten myself more back in that range, but you're the one that told me to do it because you sat there and you ran a couple of blood tests. You're like, Chris, you don't have a real problem. Slightly elevated in the liver enzymes. And I was like, well, the pandemic's been rough.
Yeah.
And so I've done a lot to try to cut back on that. So what you're telling me is that it's not the end of the world. It's just about how you're spreading it out.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. Although what I would say is that everyone has their own certain risk factors. There'll be patients that will come in and they're consuming 20, 25 drinks a week, and all of their blood tests are stone cold normal,
right.
but it's still not healthy. And then the flip side of that is that if you're in that range, but you do have some abnormalities on your labs, or you're seeing your blood pressure that's up, it's only going to help you if you reduce the amount. So I think that, finding that middle ground where you're not completely, and I think, like you said, with your job, I mean, it's not realistic to say I'm never going to touch a drop of alcohol.
I can't do beer reviews without going to the breweries. Like, I mean, there's certain things I can't do.
Right.
Yeah.
But being aware, I think that's the key. Be aware of how much you're consuming, when you're consuming it, and then the environments where you tend to overdo it. Because if you go in some of these, if you have a White Sox game every once in a while, not that big of an issue. But if you're
I'm going to 81 games,
season ticket holder, I mean, then it's kind of a problem.
81 games and I'm having 8 beers while I'm there. That's a bad That's a bad idea. Right, exactly. A couple extra inning ones in there, it gets really bad. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying there. That makes perfect sense. All right, so one other thing I want to ask you before I let you go, because as you're talking about this, this is a question I think that a lot of people right away, they're listening to you on any of this stuff when it comes to red meat, alcohol, what they eat, stuff like that. They go, well, genetically, my whole family has never had a problem living that way.
Sure.
Is that a real thing? Because I'll tell you this, on the Lanuti side of the family, you die young if you die before you're 90. Seems to be the thing. It's crazy.
That's great.
I have, my father has an uncle who just passed at 102, and his aunt is 103 and has all of her facilities and talks to him on the phone. And he's like, she sounds exactly what she sounded like when I was a kid. Okay. My grandfather died at 90 or 91, and people are like, oh man, he was young. Like, that's how they are. My wife's side of the family, not so much. My kids are in trouble. But there's like a bloodline thing. I look at my dad, and like, I've always said that, like, well, dad's a little overweight. Dad drinks. Dad eats this kind of stuff. Dad's fairly healthy. So, I mean, like, is there such a thing as genetics, or are people just fooling themselves when they use that as an excuse?
Yeah. Well, there definitely is a thing about genetics. So, I mean, if you have longevity in your family, then you're definitely a lot more likely to live longer.
They're all pasta eaters and wine drinkers.
Yeah. Yeah. But the way I look at it is you want to try to stack the deck in your favor as much as possible. Okay. So there are things that you can modify and things that you can't. So you cannot modify genetics, and that sometimes works in your favor. Sometimes it works against you. But the modifiable risk factors, if you can do those, it's only going to help you. And the perfect example of that is that we know that patients that have family history of cancers are at higher risk of cancer. But it still doesn't change the fact that when patients get diagnosed with cancer, they're more likely than not the first person in their family that's ever had cancer. So,
really?
Yes.
See, because I have friends of mine I was just with last week, and the whole family like has this thing that runs through where they all eventually end up with something. So I was like, wow, we've had it every once in a while, it pops up in the family, but it's rare to us. Yeah. So you're saying that generally when somebody gets cancer, they're like the first.
Yeah, that's true.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Okay, well, thanks for that thought.
Yeah.
Right at the end, Dr. Beckmann makes us all nervous. We'll have to have him back again to calm us all down.
Very uplifting, right?
Yeah, really uplifting. Really uplifting. I can't drink, stop eating steaks, and I'm going to get cancer. That's right. That's wonderful, Doc. I had a blast on this show. Family First Medical Group, yourffmg.com. The doctor, I'm going to tell you this. He sat down with us today and he talked about this. You would be like, wow, I wish my doctor would talk to me like this in an appointment. You may talk more than any other doctor that I've ever been in a room. Every single question I ask you, you give me an answer. And you're not trying to push me out the door. And I've always been very, very impressed with that. And you don't give me bad advice because you're in a hurry. Like, I had an older doctor one time who, like, I said something like, I'm a little stressed out because of the 911 center. He's like, I have a couple beers at the end of the day. I said, well, that sounds like sound medical advice. Then I'm drinking it. I'm telling my wife, like, this was prescribed by my doctor.
Yeah, there you go.
My doctor said to have a couple extra beers, so I've increased my alcohol intake to get over my stress. Like, that wasn't good, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, like, I like the fact you sit down and you kind of explain things. Like, when I have questions, you don't just say, oh, don't worry about it, take this pill. You seem to want to stay away from them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, if you're looking for a change or something like that, Dr. Beckmann and his staff do excellent work right here in Evergreen Park, and I appreciate you jumping on.
Thanks a lot, Chris, as always.
Look at all those people in this great suburb driving down 95th and Kedzie. What a great place. It's called Evergreen Park, but we know it better as the EP. We're known for more than just the Unabomber. Remember Ted Kaczynski? You guys might even remember that big old rooster on 95th Street. It's all part of EP's history. So listen up to the EP podcast. You might be asking why. Because we talk about all things and we celebrate all the great things in the 60805. It's the EP podcast. All things Evergreen Park. It's the EP podcast. Evergreen Park.